Welcome to All Things Considered CX, the podcast where we challenge the status quo of customer experience. Hosted by Bob Azman, this show is all about disrupting practices and redefining what it means to truly connect with customers. In this unhinged approach to CX, we're focused on building better experiences from the ground up. Each episode, Bob dives into the bold ideas, unconventional strategies, and fresh perspectives that are shaking up the world of CX. We're bringing you the voices that are pushing boundaries and changing the game. If you're ready to rethink how customer experience is done and drive real transformation, you're in the right place. Let's get into today's episode of All Things Considered CX.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the All Things Considered CX podcast, Unhinged. We have a really intriguing guest today, a little bit what I call our adjacent podcast, meaning we're not going to focus just solely on CX, but we're actually going to what I would call put CX in action here with our guests. And our guest is Nemo Neal, who is the Chief of Design at Mozee, joining me today. Welcome, Nemo, to the podcast. Glad to have you. Would love for you to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Yeah, so my real name's David Neal, but everyone who knows me calls me Nemo. I haven't gone by David in at least 20 years. Yeah, funny story there is just a long-standing nickname. I've been a DJ since a teenager, and it was a name that I caught on in the DJ world that I use for my online handle. And then I met a lot of the people that I interact with in the industry online, so they called me Nemo. And it just kind of stuck, and that's what everybody knows me by.
That's excellent. And
Yeah.
Nemo, where are you sitting right now? I think our listeners would really enjoy, for those of you joining by video, where are you sitting right now?
So I'm actually in one of the development vehicles, one of our test vehicles, which has a really fun history. Formerly, before I was with Mozee as chief of design, I ran I was a head of design for uh, just a general all-purpose turnkey product development company. But just right before that, before COVID, I was the design director for a company called Local Motors. Local Motors was known for a lot of things, not the least of which was large-scale 3D printing and a really fun car called the Rally Fighter, which if you get a chance, look those up. Those are was kind of our bread and butter as far as attitude. But we wound up becoming known in around 2018, 2019 for a little vehicle called the Ollie. And that was something that I was the first time I got to be head of design was for the Ollie 2.0. And the Ollie is a little, I like to call it toaster on wheels, but it's essentially a purpose-built, ground-up autonomous vehicle. And yeah, it seats about 10 to 12. It's using space as much as possible. So this is very open. There's a lot of glass, as you can see, and I'm actually sitting in one right now. But it's designed with the customer in mind and the end user in mind for figuring out what do we do in these inner cities where congestion is a major problem. And we figured we take something that's the size of a normal car. This is roughly the footprint of something like a Honda Civic, and then you try to put 5 to 10 cars worth of people in there, with the American average being 1.5 persons per car, right? So that's how you solve congestion, is you try to maximize space in the footprint of a normal car. And yeah, we're pretty happy with what we did there. Unfortunately, due to COVID, Local Motors did not survive, and they had closed down in Q1 of 2022. A friend of mine actually purchased the IP, and through that relationship, Mozee was able to get a hold of the Ollie, even though Local Motors uh, did not survive. The Ollie lives on, and so we're using that as a development vehicle. And then we will actually be developing a vehicle in a similar category, obviously with all my knowledge and stuff of this industry, and we're going to roll out our own vehicle hopefully here in about a year.
Excellent. So Nemo, I don't think people wake up one day and say, I want to be head of design of an autonomous vehicle.
So neither did I.
Yeah, so I wasn't thinking that was the case. So how did you get here? I always liked the background.
Sure.
How did you end up there?
So I have a
Mm,
really fun background in that I didn't go about achieving where I am right now in a conventional means by any standpoint. I was actually an insurance salesman. That was my adult job, if you will. And as I mentioned earlier, I've been a DJ since I was a teenager in the 90s, right? So that was my night job. Like that was the thing I did for the fun and excitement of something I was good at, I could make money with, right? But the whole time I've loved to draw, and I've been building cars with my dad and my uncles ever since I was really young. Like some of my first memories are around building cars. And so I had this love of,
mm,
illustration, fine art. Um, and then I had this deep love of cars. And eventually those two joined forces. And well, as you can imagine, when you get a lot of downtime at your desk when you're selling insurance. And so even when I'm like taking customer calls and stuff, I was sketching. There was an online collaborative platform that Local Motors had created in 2008. That's actually how I discovered them, which united me to this greater automotive design community that I didn't even know existed. I lived in Iowa at the time. Yeah. Um, and
mm-hmm.
so I was able to unite with this community. And fast forward to 2014, that's when Local Motors gave me sort of my break in the automotive design industry and gave me an industrial designer job and worked my tail off to earn not only that position, but I wound up becoming director of design in 2018. So yeah, and by the
Mm.
way, notice I never at one point said anything about college. I didn't go to school for this. I loved it so much that
Oh, okay.
I worked very, very hard on it.
Mm-hmm. That's really it's really interesting in terms of the background and the path. Autonomous vehicles, I mean, they're hot right now, right? It's a buzz out there. And so as to what are you working on? What's the
Sure.
latest and greatest? What occupies your day?
Yeah. So Mozee's bread and butter really comes down to something that our CEO created, which is his autonomy stack, his object detection stack, uh, and self-driving stack. So that technology stack, being that I've been in the industry for a while, when he first showed me, even at the early stages, it blew me away because he rethought how these systems should think and work. And so immediately me and him hit it off, and we had very similar sort of philosophies on how we wanted to accomplish the things we wanted to accomplish in this niche. Um, Fast forward a couple of years, I've known Sean about 3 years now, actually, and what he's been able to achieve with this, very small team and and a lot of very, very capable people, what he's been able to achieve is pretty next to revolutionary. We'll see how it hits the industry when we're actually out there deploying in scale, but so far it's showing a ton of promise. Now, our day to day here is doing a lot of different forms of object detection because our main core thing is what we call GPI. What GPI is Generative Perception Intelligence. Part of the reason why is because we were kind of getting saddled with the name AI due to the way that the technology functions, but there's a
Mm,
lot of baggage that comes with the term AI. And so we did a little bit of digging into like what does our software stack and our perception stack really do? And it was more around the way that it does a cognitive style of perception. And so we determined that it has to have some sort of separate
mm,
category name, and we call that our GPI. Now, part of the part of the brilliance of that is as you can imagine, with its capability to detect objects um, quite quickly, I might add, it has far-reaching capabilities far beyond just the automotive realm. Now, we started with the automotive realm because the question is very clear, right? Like the question of what we're trying to solve is very clear. But as we looked at the capabilities of the perception stack, we realized there's fertile ground in a lot of other places. We hire veterans, and so there's obviously a DoD kind of connection there that they were like, hey, man, this would be great in certain capacities there. Made some really great introductions. Oh, excuse me. And then from there, we realized like for our efforts in automotive with the autonomous industry, the kind of pinnacle achievement is if we can get to V to X, which is vehicle to everything, where everything's talking and the vehicles are able to make real-time decisions with all this information. You can offload sensors from the vehicle into infrastructure and make all these things talk, right? So we realize if that's the pinnacle achievement, what's potentially one of the inroads to get there, knowing the capabilities that we have. Well, we realized that with our object detection and perception stack being what it is, public safety, right? Just being able to see what's going around the cities and a lot of the cities that reached out to us with this concept. It wasn't even on our radar to think about. No pun intended about radar, but but it wasn't even on our radar to think about.
Right.
But it was one of those things where once they brought it up, it was like, oh, yeah, that's a really natural fit. And it's a step in the inroads to achieving a V2X potential later on, once all these things actually figure out how we can make them all talk and that the sort of information communication protocols are really robust. And so we're exploring all these different potential I would say adjacent applications in certain ways because they all kind of lean into our core development of developing a perception stack that is far and away more safe than anything else that's out there.
Mhm. And so when what I like about what you're talking about is, I wear kind of two hats: customer experience and supply chain and operations. And one of the things we talk
Hmm.
about in supply chain a lot is the design stage, right? And involving
My favorite.
supply chain and operations early on, right? And not handing operations a design and say, here, make this. And then operations becomes the bad guy and comes back and says, well, we can't find that raw material. We can't, whatever it is. So bringing
Yeah,
that forward. So I'm curious and it sounds like that's what you're doing, right? Bringing that, everybody's involved in the design. Obviously, you are the experts and the engineers, but it sounds to me
right.
like everybody's involved. Am I reading that right?
Spot on. I mean, putting it simply spot on. What I would elaborate on is that there's too much I would say linear thinking and not enough parallel thinking in multiple industries, right? I would say automotive clearly has that, but being that I've done industrial design on multiple different types of products, not just automotive, although that tends to be my specialty. um, I'm noticing it even in working with our software engineers and our mobile engineers, right? Is there's a lot of this sort of linear thinking, if this, then this, rather than if we think in parallel, we can influence each other's capabilities and decisions and be able to come to consensus a little faster and iterate much more efficiently, right? I like to say, being that I'm design, but I like to say we need to throw as much poop at the wall while it's cheap poop and
Mm,
not later on down the development pipeline when you have much more expensive propositions, like you said, deeper into supply chain, when your engineers are like actually like building and breaking things, right? If I can
right.
do that in the design phase much more efficiently, then what I can do, and again, use the engineer's knowledge and capability and experience to vet all of the things that I want to try, right? So there's a discipline
Mhm.
to the evaluation criteria. And again, keep it cheaper by failing in the design phase much quicker, iterate much faster. And then by the time it gets to the engineers to execute, they're already involved in the process and very aware of and bought into the solutions that are provided. And so, yeah.
And so, from a creative standpoint, how would you describe yourself? Are you, the creative genius? Are you the hands-on build it? What's your approach to this? This is a fascinating approach to design.
So I'm definitely hands-on. Like I said, I've been building
Yeah.
cars ever since I was young kid and I really like to wrench and build my own stuff at home, right?
Hmm.
But I would say that I like to joke, but there's a big nugget of truth here. It's like I like to start at the delusions of grandeur, right? And think about what the art of the possible looks like, and just think of what that potentially unrealistic, slightly utopian world looks like, and then just hit it with doses of pragmatism as sort of like the grounding element and stuff like that, but keeping the dream alive. You know what I mean? Because if you start with the pragmatism, your dreams are tend to be anchored down a little too tightly. But if you start with the dream and then anchor it down, like you wind up being a little bit further along in the visionary process than you are. And I would say I tend to be a bit more pragmatic than some of my other designer colleagues from the standpoint of I know I have to build this at some point. You know what I mean?
Wow.
And I know what goes into that. I got knuckle scars to prove it kind of thing, you know?
Right.
And so but I don't want to be anchored down by that pragmatism too early in the process. I want to allow the creativity and imagination to flow. And then only at some point when it borders on the absurd, do you go ahead and allow it to be anchored down by, best practices, first principles, and things like that.
Hmm. Excellent. The one of the other comment you've made a couple of comments related to um, like cities coming to you saying there's applications for this, or
Oh yeah,
early on you talked about, the average number of people in a car and the customer experience. How are you bringing in, like, how do you know what to design? I mean, how are you bringing that customer, whether it's a city or it's an individual that wants a vehicle like you're talking about, how do you bring
sure.
that component into the process?
So we have found ourselves here at Mozee in a really interesting position in that the cities that we're talking to, which a lot of them are right here in our backyard, because the DFW Metroplex is pretty expansive. A lot of different small communities, and they all have interesting use cases. And so they're bringing us that information, and then from there we look at, okay, what's a vehicle platform need to do in order to fulfill those various different customer requests? How many of those customer requests are even feasible, right? And we can have those conversations with the community. So I'd say we're pretty blessed at Mozee to have those opportunities. In general, when it comes to design, you have to do a deep dive in understanding who you're building for and what their why is, not your why, not the product maker's why, but the end user's why, right? Because we're technically a B2B company, so like, yeah, I want to know what the B needs so I can provide them
Mhm.
with potential solutions. But if the end users don't engage with it, well then, they're sunk. So I'm very conscientious of what those end user personas look like. Now, as you can imagine, with a vehicle like this, going in cities and university campuses and resorts and amusement parks and all the different things that we've explored, that's a lot of different potential personas. But
Mhm.
what you do is you go ahead and run the sort of imaginary thread of who these people are, and then you find your common ground of what are your base amount of features that can cover as much as that territory of all these different personas as you can, and that's your base feature set. And then you leave room for modularity and playfulness, if you will, right? That way you can start to address all these more individual niches of, like I said, amusement parks and resorts and, entertainment districts and cities, urban cores, these types of things. You leave enough modularity in there that now it's starting to fit into those specific niches a little bit nicer.
Mhm. That makes a lot of sense to me. And the other thought that crosses my mind is that you're, I don't know how you would describe it, cutting edge, bleeding edge, but you know, we, as people that would ride this, to your point, it's B2B, but we don't know what we want because this is something we've never experienced. If you give me a car with a motor, I'm going to say, okay, I want it to have air conditioning and power windows and so forth. You talk to me
Right.
about an autonomous vehicle, I'm going to say, I don't know. What can it do? Right? What I
Right.
don't know, what I don't know. So how do you overcome that obstacle in design to say, you can ask, but I don't know.
Yeah.
It's you're out there, right? You're designing the future.
You're asking the same question that people asked when the smartphone came out, right?
Yeah,
It's just
right.
like, what type of feature should a phone that's basically just a screen, like what sort of features should that have, right? And that's when we
Mhm.
realize it's a lot more than a phone, right? Like phone makes and calls, maybe makes and sends text. Um,
Right.
Sure, but what else? Maybe we throw a camera on it. Maybe it now is your MP3 player, your camera, your phone, your connection to the internet, right? And it's no different with this, right? Is when people are in here and they're no longer driving, that means that they have the ability to spend that time probably on that exact phone that we're describing, if we're being honest. But
Right.
there's opportunities for different types of engagements. We have various different forms of digital real estate that they can interact with in the vehicle. There's some screens and stuff. The sounds are going to be a little bit more tailored, not only for, same with the screens, but not only for ADA purposes, right? But also for the purposes of being a very engaging and inviting and approachable environment. In addition, the way the seating layout is it's shaped like a horseshoe where everyone faces each other,
Mm.
right? And then there's like room for like about 8 to 10 people seated. So if you think that's a bit more cozy environment than the typical mass transit where everybody faces the same direction primarily and nobody engages with one another. And the last thing most people describe, typical mass transit is like safe, friendly, or clean. We
Mm-hmm.
try to fix that by nature of design of having a smaller footprint, everyone's facing each other, and create that sort of like reconnecting communities type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because especially since COVID, we really feel like between that and some of our software efforts, that's where our real like desire lies is how can we reestablish those connections, you know?
Right. Well, that's another aspect I would have never thought about, right? It's not just transportation. To your point about it's not just a phone.
Yeah.
There's so much more it can do. We're talking to Nemo Neal, Chief of Design at Mozee. A fascinating conversation about design, and
Excuse me.
we are focused a little bit on autonomous vehicles, but we're also talking about a broader discussion around design. Um, I can't let you go without talking about, and you kind of mentioned a little bit about AI and taking it to the next level and how this all wraps. And I love the way you just talked about, as I mentioned, the experience, creating a different experience with mass transit.
Right.
Um, eh, where's all this going? As you look into your crystal ball, I always ask this of my guests, look into
Great
that
question.
crystal ball and where are we going? I mean, and how fast are we going, right?
So that's actually a good segue into a story of where I found myself in the autonomous vehicle world, right? So in 2016, yeah, that's right. In 2016, working at Local Motors, the car that we were best known for was what most would describe as just awesome, right? Like it was a street legal trophy truck that was built in Arizona, made to go and just tear up the desert, but you could drive it on the roads, right?
Hmm.
It was featured in movies like Transformers 4, Machete Lives, Fast and Furious 8. So you can understand the kind of ethos based on some of those movie titles that the car kind of had around it. So we were going to follow that up with a street legal track car, which was,
Hmm.
if you're familiar with it, which was similar to like the Aerial Atom. That was the goal, is to compete with on the levels of performance, something like the Aerial Atom. Simplistic, very minimalistic, Spartan, but just full on track devastating weaponry, right? Like that was what I was working on. And I was so happy. As a car guy, I was just like every day I was coming to work and just in a fever dream, and we got pretty far with it. It was called the SFO1. The guy who won the challenge, was a guy named Greg Thompson, was a phenomenal designer. He's actually responsible for quite a few designs of interesting interesting vehicles that are out there, including the Arca trike, if you get a chance to check that out. But working with him, like he was a spitfire of a guy, but he said it how it was, and he was actually really blessed to work with. Well, some investors came in. We're a startup, of course, right? We're doing a round, and next thing you know, they want to pivot. We're doing large scale 3D printing, right?
Oh,
And so we're
okay.
like, okay, so what can we do? And we did this pivot towards like urban mobility. And at first we were thinking about like something like a city car that's personally owned. Very quickly we realized that's actually doesn't have the potential of something like an autonomous vehicle. But what would you even do? Like, where do you even start? This is late 2015, early
Uh-huh.
2016, and we're like, we're pretty early on. Well, we got some great people on our team that have been in various forms of autonomy through the DoD and things like that. Worked on robotics and things like that since 2008. And so they came in and they started giving us kind of a picture of that. We ran one of our challenges around our urban mobility that Locomotors was known for. A 17-year-old designer won that thing out
Oh,
of, yeah, he's a Central Colombian, excuse me, designer who made enough money by winning our challenge to go to school in Italy, and
wow.
he's
Oh,
doing great. And he created the first version of the Ollie, which he called the Berlino, but we renamed it to Ollie, and that was when Ollie 1.0 was born. I was taken off of the SFO1 project to be the head of design for exterior development because we were developing the students' design, and I was so
mhm.
mad. I was so mad. I was like, you're gonna cancel that and you're gonna put me on this weird little thing, right? But upon doing the research, what I realized is like I felt like there were two completely opposite universes that were diametrically opposed and just locking horns in
Mhm.
competition. What I realized very quickly in digging into the research that was already done and doing my own research, talking with various different community members that were a part of our global community with local motors, these things are not diametrically opposed. As a matter of fact, what made me fall in love with the idea of and the ethos around what we were doing with the Ollie is that the Ollie is solving problems that I could never take that really cool car into,
Mhm.
right? And I
Mhm.
would hate to drive the really cool track weapon on the streets that the Ollie would actually thrive in, right? And so
Mhm.
these two things are solving entirely different use cases. And once you actually solve the problems that the Ollie was trying to solve, and that Mozee will continue to develop and solve with our next vehicle, right? Now what you're doing is you're actually taking and solving the appliance problem of driving, where,
Mhm.
if you ask anyone what their dream car is, no one says a Toyota Camry. It's a great car, but it's a great
Right.
car because it's a great appliance,
Right.
right? But
Right.
if you can solve some aspect of that appliance problem in the automotive design, you're going to re-inject a passion that made Americans fall in love with the cars in the first place. That's a passion I grew up with in the hot rod world, building stuff with my dad. And then I
Right.
continued all through my teenage years building imports and all through my older years building uh, slightly more expensive and I would say a little bit more eloquent vehicles, not so boy racer. But the point is like, if I could save money by taking these around town, save on parking, well, where am I going to spend that money? I'm going to spend that money on a car.
Right.
Where are you going to spend that money? Like that opened my whole aperture for what this could be and made me fall in love with it because now I'm seeing a way to reignite a passion for whatever that thing that you get your time and your money back that you want to do, right? And for some of them, especially my kids, it's going to be cars.
Yeah, that the whole passion component I think is spot on in this world as well. That we might be losing some of it. Where I was talking with another guest about we're losing the humanity of when we're using AI, and we have to bring humanity back into that. And that's exactly what you're talking about, is that passion and
Right.
that desire and love for it, and that makes a whole lot of sense to me.
Yeah, the AI conversation, we like to talk about it as like Industry 4.0 out made it to where you can outsource work, right? Like
Hmm.
through robotics and more advanced forms of making things, right? So it outsourced work, and I feel like AI is outsourcing thinking. And so we have to be very careful and not let the tool overwhelm and make us complacent. And
Yes.
we here at Mozee feel very confident that GPI
Mm.
is taking some aspects of like the cognitive burden of transversing cities and driving and stuff like that generally no one seems to enjoy based on our research, right?
Right.
And that's the stuff that actually solves problems rather than yeah, AI can make pretty pictures, but can it replace the Mona Lisa? That's the sort of that cerebral crescent that surrounds things like AI. That's not the job it needs to be doing. The stuff that we're creating is the job that
Right.
humans shouldn't waste their time as much on. So we're very conscientious about those kinds of technological implications and consequences.
No question about it. Hearing you talk about it, Nemo, this has been a great conversation.
Sure,
How can what's the best way for people to explore more if they want to learn more?
sure. So you can find Mosey at moseealong.com. And we are not shy to using Mosey as a verb, so feel free to put that in your language.
Good.
We're also on LinkedIn and Instagram. We're Mosey Official on Instagram, and you can find us as Mosey Inc., I believe, on LinkedIn. And then me, as I said, I'm David Scott Neal, but I'm also known as Nemo, and so you can find me as Nemo Junglist on Instagram, and David Nemo Neal on LinkedIn.
Outstanding. Really intriguing and fascinating conversation, Nemo. Really appreciated your time today. Best of luck as you continue this journey. And I, for one, am going to be anxious to hear more about how it's going and where it leads us. So it's just been great. I appreciate your time today.
Not a problem. Had fun talking to you.
Absolutely. And listeners, thanks for joining us today. And as always, share this podcast with your network and stay tuned for more great guests on the All Things Considered CX podcast, Unhinged.